The loudest person in the room is rarely the one you should fear. The laughter echoed through the massive glass atrium of Hayes Global Security Headquarters as dozens of elite applicants gathered for the final bodyguard selection process. Men and women wearing expensive tactical uniforms, polished boots, and decorated resumes stood confidently beneath towering American flags, each convinced they belonged among the country's finest executive protectors. Then the front entrance quietly opened, and every conversation seemed to pause for just a heartbeat before turning into something far less welcoming. A man wearing a faded brown work jacket stepped inside, carrying a worn duffel bag over one shoulder. His jeans showed years of honest work, his boots carried dust instead of shine, and a faint stain of engine grease rested near one sleeve as though he had driven directly from another job. His name was Ethan Walker, 42 years old, a single father. There were no medals pinned across his chest, no championship titles printed on his clothing, no expensive watch. Nothing about him appeared extraordinary. He walked calmly toward the registration table, signed his name with steady handwriting, thanked the receptionist with genuine kindness, and quietly moved toward the waiting area. A burst of laughter followed him almost immediately. "Hey, buddy," one applicant called with a grin. "Vehicle maintenance is around back." Another shook his head. Maybe he thought this was a job fair for mechanics. Several others joined the laughter, confident they had already figured him out before hearing a single word. Ethan simply smiled politely without defending himself. He had learned long ago that dignity never needed permission from strangers. High above the training floor, Victoria Hayes watched from an executive observation balcony overlooking the entire facility. At 36 years old, she had transformed her family's technology empire into one of America's most respected executive security organizations. She believed the people responsible for protecting lives should possess more than physical strength. They needed judgment, discipline, humility, and unwavering character. Even so, when her chief of security handed her Ethan's application, she found herself quietly raising one eyebrow. "Occupation," she read aloud. "Night security officer. Automechanic. Single father." She flipped through the remaining pages. "That is all." Her security director nodded. "Compared to everyone else here, his resume is unusually ordinary." Victoria glanced through the glass toward Ethan, who now sat alone near the back of the room, resting both hands on his old duffel bag while the other candidates confidently exchanged stories about military units, celebrity clients, executive contracts, and championship tournaments. Ethan never interrupted anyone. He never volunteered his own experience. He simply listened. "He does not look like someone applying to lead my executive protection team," Victoria admitted quietly. "No," her director replied. "He does not." Down below, another applicant walked past Ethan and stopped just long enough to glance at his worn jacket. "Sir," she said with a polite smile that barely hid her amusement, "are you sure you are in the right building?" Ethan looked up with calm blue eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he answered gently. "I believe I am exactly where I need to be." She offered a small shrug before walking away, convinced the quiet father simply did not understand the level of competition surrounding him. A sharp electronic tone suddenly echoed throughout the enormous facility as conversations instantly stopped. Every applicant turned toward the lead instructor standing beneath the company emblem at the center of the polished training floor. "Welcome," the instructor announced. "Today we are not searching for the strongest candidate. We are searching for the safest one." Around the room, confident smiles remained firmly in place. No one noticed Ethan slowly removing his faded jacket, folding it with remarkable care, and placing it neatly inside his duffel bag before standing with quiet confidence. No one noticed the small silver ring hanging from a chain around his neck. And no one could have imagined that the man everyone had mistaken for the least qualified applicant was about to change the opinion of every person inside the building without ever raising his voice. The applicants formed neat rows across the polished training floor as the lead instructor slowly walked to the center of the room with a digital tablet in one hand. His calm voice carried naturally through the enormous facility. "Your resume may have earned you an invitation," he said, but it will not earn you this position. Today, every decision you make will matter more than every achievement you have listed. The room became completely still. Confident smiles remained on many faces, but the atmosphere had shifted. The first evaluation began with a series of observation exercises designed to measure awareness instead of athletic ability. Large screens displayed crowded executive offices, hotel lobbies, airport terminals, and conference centers for only a few seconds before the images disappeared. Each applicant then answered detailed questions about exits, unusual objects, employee behavior, hidden risks, and subtle changes inside each environment. Several candidates finished almost immediately, convinced that speed demonstrated confidence. Ethan Walker quietly remained seated until the final moments of the countdown, reading every question carefully before writing each answer in neat, deliberate handwriting. He never rushed because he understood that real mistakes often arrive disguised as urgency. From the executive observation balcony, Victoria Hayes watched the candidates through the glass, while members of her security leadership team quietly compared notes. Candidate 16 has federal executive protection experience, one manager observed. Another pointed toward a decorated former law enforcement officer. Candidate 22 has outstanding tactical credentials. Victoria listened politely before looking down at Ethan once again. He still sat alone near the back of the room, showing none of the nervous energy surrounding the other applicants. "He seems unusually comfortable," she remarked. Her chief of security nodded. Either he does not realize how competitive this is, or pressure does not affect him. Minutes later, the instructors collected the completed assessments. The lead evaluator reviewed the scores without speaking, his expression becoming noticeably more thoughtful with every page he turned. Finally, he looked up. Only one candidate achieved a perfect score during the first observation exercise. Several applicants instinctively glanced toward Brandon Cross, the respected company favorite. Instead, the instructor calmly announced, "Candidate 48, Ethan Walker." Quiet whispers immediately spread across the room. One applicant shook his head. "That cannot be right." Another folded his arms. He probably guessed. Ethan did not react. He simply thanked the volunteer who returned his identification badge and waited for the next assignment. The second evaluation proved even more difficult. Silent surveillance videos appeared on large monitors showing ordinary business activity inside executive buildings. Applicants identified developing concerns based entirely on body language, movement, positioning, and environmental details without hearing a single word of conversation. Again, Ethan remained patient while others hurried. He noticed a receptionist repeatedly glancing toward an unsecured hallway, an unattended delivery cart blocking an emergency route, and a visitor whose attention remained fixed on security cameras rather than reception procedures. When the results were announced, Ethan once again finished at the top of the group. This time the room did not fill with laughter. It filled with confusion. Victoria slowly lowered the evaluation report resting in her hands. "Bring me his application again," she quietly instructed. Her assistant handed it over. Victoria studied every page for a second time, searching for anything that explained the extraordinary performance she had just witnessed. There was nothing except honest employment, military service listed without detail, and years devoted to raising a daughter alone. Down on the training floor, Ethan's phone vibrated softly inside his folded jacket. During the short break, he stepped aside, unlocked the screen, and smiled warmly at a message from his 12-year-old daughter. The message contained only one sentence. "Remember, Dad, you already make me proud every single day." Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket, took a slow breath, and returned to the training area with the same quiet confidence he had carried since the moment he entered the building. Around him, the jokes had stopped completely. No one was laughing anymore. They had started watching. The short break ended as instructors guided the remaining applicants toward a newly constructed executive simulation area inside the training center. Movable office walls, reception desks, conference rooms, elevators, and security checkpoints transformed the polished facility into what looked like a real corporate headquarters during a busy business day. The lead instructor stood before the group with calm authority. Executive protection is not about reacting after something goes wrong, he explained. It is about noticing the small details that prevent problems before anyone else realizes they exist. Several applicants nodded confidently, eager to demonstrate years of professional experience. Brandon Cross adjusted his sleeves with quiet confidence before stepping into the first scenario. His performance looked polished and decisive. He directed volunteers efficiently, positioned himself between executives and distractions, and completed the assignment with the confidence expected from Hays Global's most respected security specialist. Applause followed as he finished. Brandon accepted the recognition with a modest smile before returning to the observation area. One applicant whispered, "That is why he is the favorite." Ethan Walker entered the next scenario, carrying nothing except his identification badge. The room remained completely silent for several moments. Instead of immediately moving toward the executive he had been assigned to protect, he slowly studied the entire environment. His eyes traveled across ceiling cameras, emergency exits, reflective glass, unattended delivery packages, employee workstations, reception desks, and even the placement of decorative furniture. Some applicants quietly laughed again. "He is wasting time," one murmured. Another replied, "He still does not understand what this job is." Ethan never heard them because his attention remained fixed on the environment around him. Suddenly, the simulation began. A volunteer portraying a senior executive unexpectedly changed direction after receiving a pretend phone call. At the same moment, a receptionist requested assistance with a visitor, two delivery workers rolled equipment through the hallway, and another employee accidentally left a conference room door partially open. Most applicants who had completed the exercise earlier had immediately followed the executive, allowing the growing confusion behind them to unfold unnoticed. "Étant chose différente." He calmly closed the conference room door, politely asked one delivery worker to pause for a few seconds while another group passed safely, acknowledged the receptionist with a reassuring nod, and quietly adjusted his own position, so he maintained clear visual awareness of every moving person without making anyone feel uncomfortable. His movements appeared so natural that they barely attracted attention, yet every decision created more order than the moment before. From the executive balcony, Victoria Hayes leaned slightly closer to the observation glass. "He is not chasing every distraction," she said softly. Her chief of security nodded while reviewing his notes. "He is reducing opportunities for confusion before they become problems." The final stage of the exercise arrived without warning. An instructor intentionally dropped a clipboard behind Ethan, while another volunteer attempted to draw him toward a loud disagreement developing across the simulated lobby. Ethan briefly acknowledged the sound, but never abandoned the executive under his care. He calmly answered the instructor without turning around. "Someone behind me needs assistance, but the priority remains here until another team member responds." The evaluator smiled before ending the exercise. Several instructors immediately compared score sheets, speaking quietly among themselves. After a long moment, the lead instructor addressed the entire room. Candidate 48 demonstrated the highest level of situational judgment during this evaluation. He prevented multiple developing problems while maintaining continuous awareness of his assigned responsibility. The room fell silent once again. Brandon Cross studied Ethan with growing curiosity rather than skepticism. Victoria closed her notebook without writing another word. For the first time since the selection process had begun, she stopped wondering whether Ethan Walker belonged inside her company. Instead, she found herself asking a far more important question. What kind of life teaches a quiet single father to see an entire room before anyone else notices the first problem? The afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished training floor as the remaining applicants gathered around the final evaluation area. The atmosphere no longer resembled the confident excitement of the morning. Every person in the room had watched Ethan Walker quietly rise to the top of every assessment without seeking attention or recognition. The laughter had disappeared, replaced by curiosity and cautious respect. The lead instructor stepped forward and allowed the silence to settle before speaking. The next evaluation cannot be measured by a written score, he announced. Executive protection is built on trust. Your clients must believe that you will make the right decision when there is no time to ask permission. Several candidates exchanged determined looks. Brandon Cross folded his arms confidently, his expression calm, but noticeably more serious than before. Victoria Hayes remained on the observation balcony, studying every movement below with increasing interest. She no longer looked at Ethan as the least qualified applicant. She watched him as though she were trying to solve a difficult puzzle. The instructor continued. Each finalist will participate in a controlled professional demonstration. This is not a contest of strength. It is an evaluation of judgment, balance, restraint, and emotional control. The announcement immediately changed the mood inside the facility. Brandon stepped toward the equipment table and quietly adjusted his training gloves before turning toward Ethan. His voice remained respectful. Looks like we finally get to work together. Ethan smiled politely. I've been looking forward to learning from everyone here. Brandon laughed softly. Most people would have answered that differently. Ethan shrugged gently. There is always something worth learning. Brandon studied him for a moment before extending his hand. No matter what happens next, you have earned my respect. Ethan accepted the handshake with steady confidence. Thank you. That means more than you probably realize. Nearby applicants watched the exchange in silence. Earlier that morning, they had expected Brandon to dismiss the quiet single father without another thought. Instead, the company's most respected specialist now treated Ethan as an equal. High above the training floor, Victoria noticed the change immediately. Interesting, she whispered. Her security director looked toward Brandon. He only offers that kind of respect when someone has truly impressed him. Victoria nodded slowly without taking her eyes off Ethan. Respect recognizes something that pride cannot. The instructors called the remaining candidates toward the demonstration area, while technicians prepared the professional training mat at the center of the room. Bright overhead lights reflected across the polished surface, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a championship event than a hiring process. Every employee inside Hayes Global seemed to gather around the perimeter. Conversations faded until only quiet anticipation remained. Ethan walked toward the preparation area and carefully removed his faded work jacket. He folded it with the same deliberate care he had shown all day before placing it inside his old duffel bag. As he reached into the bag, a small framed photograph slipped halfway into view. It showed a smiling 12-year-old girl standing beside an aging pickup truck, proudly holding a handmade sign that read, "My dad is my hero." Ethan looked at the picture for only a second before gently placing it back inside. He took one slow breath and returned to the center floor. Victoria happened to notice the photograph from above. She did not recognize the child, but she recognized the expression on Ethan's face. It was not the look of a man chasing a prestigious career. It was the quiet determination of a father carrying every important reason for succeeding inside his heart. At that moment, the lead instructor stepped onto the mat and raised his hand. Candidates Brandon Cross and Ethan Walker, he announced. Please report to the demonstration area. The enormous training hall became completely silent. Every pair of eyes followed the two men as they calmly walked toward one another. One carried the reputation everyone expected. The other carried a quiet confidence that no resume had ever managed to explain. Brandon Cross and Ethan Walker stepped onto the center training mat as the enormous facility fell into complete silence. Every applicant, instructor, and executive fixed their attention on the two men standing only a few feet apart. The lead instructor looked from one candidate to the other before speaking in a calm, measured voice. This demonstration is designed to evaluate composure, judgment, restraint, and professional control. You are not here to defeat one another. You are here to demonstrate the qualities required to protect another human being with wisdom and discipline. Brandon acknowledged the instructions with a confident nod before extending his hand toward Ethan. Good luck, he said sincerely. Ethan accepted the handshake with quiet respect. Thank you. I hope we both leave here having learned something. Brandon smiled. You really are different. Ethan answered softly. Being different is not always a disadvantage. The instructor stepped backward and raised one hand. Begin. Neither man moved immediately. Brandon slowly adjusted his footing, carefully studying Ethan's posture while maintaining relaxed eye contact. Ethan remained perfectly composed, breathing evenly as though the hundreds of people watching no longer existed. Several applicants, standing near the edge of the mat, exchanged confused whispers. Why is he standing still? One asked quietly. Another shrugged. Maybe he is nervous after all. Above the training floor, Victoria Hayes leaned slightly closer to the observation glass. She noticed something the others had missed. Ethan was not standing still because he lacked confidence. He was observing every movement before deciding whether any movement was necessary at all. Brandon made the first controlled advance, carefully testing Ethan's awareness with a smooth professional maneuver used regularly during executive protection training. Ethan shifted only a fraction of a step, calmly redirecting the movement without unnecessary effort before returning to a balanced position. Brandon paused. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. He had expected resistance. Instead, he had encountered remarkable precision. The demonstration continued. Brandon varied his timing, direction, and pace, presenting one controlled challenge after another while remaining completely professional. Ethan answered each movement with the same quiet efficiency, never rushing, never overreacting, never wasting motion. It looked almost effortless, as though he had already understood each decision before Brandon finished making it. The instructors exchanged thoughtful glances while writing notes across their evaluation forms. One senior evaluator quietly whispered, "Look at his positioning." Another nodded. Every adjustment protects space instead of chasing control. Victoria heard the exchange without taking her eyes off Ethan. For the first time that day, she completely stopped thinking about resumes. She watched only character. Brandon slowly circled once more before attempting another carefully measured sequence intended to evaluate balance and response under pressure. Ethan calmly adjusted his stance, guiding Brandon's momentum safely past him before lightly redirecting his balance with remarkable timing and complete restraint. Brandon lowered one knee onto the training mat, immediately stabilized himself with calm professionalism, then looked up with unmistakable admiration. Not a single unnecessary movement had been made. Not a single display of ego had appeared. The entire demonstration had become a lesson in control rather than competition. Absolute silence filled the enormous training hall. Ethan immediately offered Brandon his hand. Brandon accepted it without hesitation, rising with a grateful smile. That, he admitted honestly, was one of the finest demonstrations of professional control I have ever experienced. Ethan shook his head gently. You challenged me to stay focused. Thank you. Brandon laughed quietly. Most people would celebrate. Ethan smiled. There is nothing to celebrate. We both came here to become better. The lead instructor stepped onto the mat and looked slowly across the room before speaking. Demonstration complete. No applause followed. No one seemed willing to interrupt the extraordinary silence that had settled throughout the building. Every applicant who had laughed that morning now understood why the quiet single father had never argued with anyone. He had never needed to. And as Victoria Hayes continued watching Ethan Walker with growing respect, she realized she was no longer searching for the strongest candidate. She had already found the man whose quiet discipline had transformed an entire room without demanding a single moment of attention. The silence inside the training hall lingered long after the demonstration had ended. Even the instructors seemed reluctant to speak, as though everyone understood they had witnessed something that could not be measured on an evaluation form. Brandon Cross stood beside Ethan Walker for another moment before giving him a respectful nod and returning to the other applicants. Along the way, several candidates quietly stepped aside, creating space without realizing they had done so. The same people who had laughed when Ethan first entered the building now greeted him with polite smiles and sincere respect. Ethan acknowledged every gesture with the same humble kindness he had shown since morning, never acting as though anything had changed. High above the training floor, Victoria Hayes slowly closed the evaluation folder resting in front of her. Her chief of security looked toward her with an expression that mixed surprise and admiration. "I have never seen Brandon speak that way about another candidate," he admitted. Victoria remained thoughtful for a moment before answering. "Neither have I." She turned toward her executive assistant. "I want everything we can legally obtain about Ethan Walker's military service." The assistant immediately began searching secure databases available through Hayes Global's executive security partnerships. Ethan's public employment history appeared exactly as expected. Auto repair shop, night security contracts, temporary maintenance work, honorable military discharge. Nothing about the records explained the level of judgment, discipline, and awareness everyone had witnessed throughout the day. The assistant expanded the search into restricted archives. A message appeared across the screen almost instantly. Additional authorization required. The assistant tried another database using Ethan's full legal name and military identification number. The same message appeared again. Victoria quietly froneth. "That is unusual." Her chief of security nodded. "Very unusual. Most service records become accessible after retirement unless specific assignments remain protected." Moments later, an encrypted telephone on the executive desk illuminated. The assistant answered briefly before handing the receiver to Victoria. "It is General Nathan Collins." Victoria accepted the call with professional courtesy. "General Collins, thank you for taking the time to speak with me." The retired officer's calm voice carried decades of quiet authority. "Miss Hayes, I understand you have questions regarding Ethan Walker." Victoria glanced through the observation glass where Ethan was carefully folding his worn jacket before placing it back inside his duffel bag. "I do," she replied. "Can you tell me whether he is qualified to protect someone in my position?" A brief silence followed before the general answered. "There are assignments I cannot discuss, and there are records that should remain exactly where they are. However, I can answer your question." Victoria guatid patiently. "If Ethan Walker accepted responsibility for your safety," the general continued, "I would consider you exceptionally fortunate." Victoria listened without interrupting. "His greatest strength was never physical ability," the general said. "It was judgment. He consistently chose the solution that protected the greatest number of people while creating the least amount of harm. Those qualities cannot be taught easily." Victoria asked one final question. "Why did someone with those abilities leave that career?" The general's voice softened. "Because one little girl deserved to grow up with her father at home more than our country deserved to keep one extraordinary professional forever." The line quietly disconnected. Victoria remained standing beside the window, holding the silent telephone for several seconds. She looked down once more and noticed Ethan smiling at another message from his daughter before slipping the phone carefully into his pocket. Around him, applicants continued discussing scores, rankings, and possible job offers. Ethan appeared interested in none of those conversations. He simply thanked a maintenance employee for bringing fresh water to the waiting area and helped another volunteer stack several folding chairs without being asked. Victoria slowly smiled to herself. The general had confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. The greatest qualification Ethan Walker possessed was not hidden inside a classified military file. It was visible in every ordinary decision he made when he believed no one important was watching. As the afternoon slowly gave way to early evening, the atmosphere inside Hayes' Global Security Headquarters became noticeably quieter. Most of the applicants had stopped comparing scores and started gathering their personal belongings, believing the selection process had nearly reached its conclusion. Ethan Walker quietly slipped his folded jacket over his shoulders and reached for his old duffel bag, fully expecting to drive across town in time to meet his daughter after school. Winning the position had never been the reason he came. Providing a better future for her had always been enough. Before he could leave, a member of the executive staff approached him with a polite smile. "Mr. Walker, Miss Hayes would appreciate a few moments of your time." Ethan nodded respectfully. "Of course." He followed the employee through a private hallway lined with photographs celebrating Hayes Global's history of protecting business leaders, humanitarian organizations, and public institutions. Every frame reflected prestige, influence, and success. Ethan barely glanced at any of them. His attention remained on the simple family photograph resting inside his duffel bag. Victoria Hayes stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office, overlooking the city skyline, glowing beneath the soft evening light. When Ethan entered, she turned with a warm but thoughtful expression. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for inviting me," Ethan replied. She motioned toward a pair of comfortable chairs near the window. "Please have a seat." Ethan sat quietly while Victoria studied him for a moment before speaking again. "General Nathan Collins spoke very highly of you." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before answering. "He has always been kinder than I deserve." Victoria smiled fondly. "That is not the impression I received." A comfortable silence settled between them before she continued. "He would not discuss your assignments, but he told me something I have not stopped thinking about." Ethan waited patiently. "He said you walked away from an extraordinary career because your daughter needed her father more than the country needed another decorated professional." Ethan looked toward the fading sunlight outside the window. "Children do not stay little forever," he said softly. "Opportunities can return. Their childhood cannot." Victoria listened carefully, sensing every word carried genuine conviction rather than rehearsed humility. "Do you ever regret that decision?" she asked. Ethan answered without hesitation. "Not for one single day." He smiled gently as he reached into his pocket and looked at another message from his daughter. "Every school concert, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday afternoon I was able to spend with her reminded me that I chose the right mission." Victoria found herself unexpectedly moved by the quiet certainty in his voice. She had spent years surrounded by people chasing promotions, wealth, titles, and recognition. Sitting across from her was a man who had quietly surrendered achievements most people could never imagine because one little girl needed someone to help with homework, attend parent meetings, and simply be home for dinner. "You know," Victoria said thoughtfully, "most applicants spend today trying to convince me they were exceptional." Ethan smiled politely. "I was only trying to show that I could be dependable." Victoria slowly nodded. "There is a difference." Before either of them could continue, Ethan's phone vibrated once again. He glanced at the screen before immediately standing. "I am sorry," he said with genuine concern. "My daughter just finished her after-school program. I promised I would never be late unless there was absolutely no other choice." Victoria noticed the sincerity on his face and smiled warmly. "Then you should keep your promise." Ethan thanked her, picked up his duffel bag, and quietly walked toward the office door. As he reached the hallway, Victoria watched him disappear around the corner with the same calm dignity he had carried throughout the entire day. She realized that every impressive skill he had demonstrated inside the training center had been remarkable, but none of them compared to the simple promise he refused to break for the person who mattered most. At that moment, Victoria no longer questioned whether Ethan Walker was the right man for the position. She only wondered how soon she could convince him that protecting her company should never require him to stop being the father his daughter already believed was the greatest hero she had ever known. Ethan Walker thanked the receptionist on his way out and stepped into the spacious front lobby just as the evening sunlight poured through the towering glass walls, covering the marble floor with warm golden reflections. Employees hurried toward the elevators as another business day came to a close, while members of the permanent security team quietly prepared Victoria Hayes for her scheduled departure. Ethan adjusted the strap of his old duffel bag and checked the time. If traffic remained light, he would arrive at his daughter's school with several minutes to spare. That thought alone brought a peaceful smile to his face. As he approached the main entrance, something caught his attention. A man wearing a visitor badge stood several feet away, speaking politely with the reception desk, yet his behavior seemed strangely disconnected from the conversation. Instead of looking toward the receptionist, the visitor repeatedly glanced at the executive access doors, the elevator security panel, and the changing positions of the protection team. Nothing about the man's appearance seemed threatening. Yet years of disciplined observation quietly reminded Ethan that genuine attention always follows purpose. He walked toward the reception desk with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the day. "Excuse me," he said kindly to the receptionist. "May I ask a small question?" She smiled politely. "Of course." Ethan nodded toward the visitor without making him uncomfortable. "Would you mind verifying whether his visitor badge was issued today? The color appears different from the temporary badges everyone else received this afternoon." The receptionist looked down at her monitor before politely checking the badge information. A brief moment later, her expression changed slightly. "One moment, please." She contacted the security desk, and within seconds, Brandon Cross arrived with another member of the executive protection team. Brandon greeted the visitor respectfully and requested a routine verification of his appointment. The man immediately apologized, explaining that he had accidentally picked up an outdated demonstration badge from a public information display after arriving early for a scheduled vendor meeting. His identification was quickly confirmed, and the misunderstanding was resolved with smiles from everyone involved. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, and no unnecessary embarrassment. Brandon thanked the visitor for his patience before turning toward Ethan. "You noticed the badge color from across the lobby?" Ethan nodded gently. "It was only a small detail. I thought it was worth checking." Brandon smiled with genuine admiration. Most people would have walked past without seeing it. Nearby, Victoria Hayes had quietly witnessed the entire exchange while preparing to leave the building. She approached Brandon after the visitor departed. "Was there ever any real danger?" she asked. Brandon shook his head. "No," because Ethan noticed something unusual before it had any chance to become a problem. Victoria looked toward Ethan, who had already begun helping a maintenance employee move a heavy supply cart away from the entrance without anyone asking him to help. She watched as he thanked the employee, held the front door open for several people leaving the building, and then quietly picked up a folder that someone had accidentally dropped near the reception desk. Every action reflected the same quiet discipline she had observed all day. Ethan was not trying to impress anyone. He simply made every place around him a little safer, a little calmer, and a little better than he had found it. Victoria slowly smiled to herself. Throughout the selection process, she had met applicants who possessed impressive strength, remarkable credentials, and extraordinary confidence. Yet the quiet single father had revealed something infinitely more valuable. He never waited for recognition before choosing to do the right thing. As Ethan stepped outside into the warm evening light and walked toward the parking lot, completely unaware that Victoria continued watching through the glass, she finally understood that the greatest protectors were not defined by the moments everyone remembered. They were defined by the countless quiet moments that prevented trouble before anyone else even realized it had been there. Ethan Walker had almost reached his aging pickup truck when he heard someone calling his name across the executive parking area. He turned and saw Victoria Hayes walking toward him without her executive team, carrying a simple leather folder instead of the stack of reports that usually followed her everywhere. The warm colors of the setting sun reflected across the glass walls of Hayes' global headquarters, surrounding the quiet moment with a sense of calm that neither of them seemed eager to interrupt. Ethan offered a respectful smile. "Miss Hayes." She returned the smile. "I hope I did not make you late." Ethan glanced at his watch. "I still have enough time to pick up my daughter." Victoria nodded with relief before extending the folder toward him. "Then I will not keep you long." Ethan accepted the folder and looked down without opening it. "What is this?" "A formal offer," Victoria answered. "Director of Executive Protection for Hayes Global." Ethan remained silent for a moment. He had expected a handshake, perhaps a polite thank you for participating, but not this. Victoria continued before he could respond. "Today you impressed every instructor, every applicant, and every member of my leadership team. You demonstrated judgment, humility, discipline, and respect. But none of those qualities convinced me as much as the promises you refused to break." Ethan looked up with quiet curiosity. "Victoria smiled gently. You never stopped being a father while trying to become something else." A comfortable silence settled between them as the evening breeze moved softly through the parking lot. Finally, Ethan asked the only question that truly mattered to him. If I accept this position, there will be afternoons when my daughter needs me before anyone else does. Parent conferences, school events, ordinary moments that cannot be scheduled twice. Can I still be the father she deserves? Victoria answered without hesitation. Yes. Ethan searched her face for a moment, making certain she truly meant it. She continued, a successful company can adapt to a schedule. A child cannot postpone growing up. I have spent years building businesses. Today you reminded me that the greatest investment anyone can make is in the people waiting at home. Ethan slowly opened the folder and read the first page before closing it again with grateful hands. Then I would be honored to accept. At that exact moment, a familiar yellow school bus turned into the visitor parking area. Emily stepped off with her backpack, spotted her father immediately, and ran toward him with an excited smile. Ethan bent down as she wrapped her arms around him. Did everything go well? She asked. Ethan smiled warmly. Better than I expected. Victoria walked over and lowered herself to Emily's eye level. You must be Emily. The young girl nodded proudly. Yes, ma'am. Victoria smiled. Your father taught everyone in my company something important today. Emily looked up at Ethan. He teaches me every day. Those simple words settled over the quiet parking lot more powerfully than any applause could have. Brandon Cross had stepped outside just in time to witness the moment. He removed his company identification badge from around his neck and walked toward Ethan with genuine respect. Congratulations, he said, extending his hand once more. This company became stronger today. Ethan accepted the handshake with sincere gratitude. Thank you. Brandon smiled. You know, this morning people saw an ordinary jacket. By this evening, we all saw extraordinary character. Victoria looked at Ethan and Emily standing side by side beneath the golden evening sky. She realized that true leadership had never been about finding the loudest voice or the most impressive resume. It was about recognizing the quiet strength that already existed before anyone else noticed it. Ethan took his daughter's hand, tucked the employment agreement safely beneath his arm, and together they walked toward the pickup truck waiting beneath the fading sunlight. No one laughed anymore. No one doubted him anymore. The building behind them remained exactly the same, but everyone inside it had changed. They had learned that dignity never demands attention. Respect is earned through consistent character, and the strongest protector is often the one who chooses kindness before recognition and family before glory. As father and daughter drove away together, the last light of day disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving behind not the memory of a competition, but the lasting example of a quiet man whose greatest victory had never been proving others wrong. It had always been keeping his promise to come home.